Okay, class. Thanks, Marty, for modeling being a good student out there. Whoop. Does that mean you got it? We fixed it? Okay. Hey, good morning. Good morning. It's great to see you here today. I'm Ashleigh Givens. I'm part of the pastoral staff here at Compass. I've been in a little bit of a silent standoff with an unknown person somewhere here in the Compass community. I realized this morning that it might be my husband. I didn't flat out ask him, but I have a suspicion it could be him. For the past couple of weeks, I've been showing up here on Sunday mornings, and our Risen Indeed Easter art has been taken off the communion tables and put away. And I go in there and dig it out and put it back out on the communion tables because we're still in the Easter season. Easter is a 50-day feast. Was reading an article by N.T. Wright this week. I feel like his name has gotten mentioned a lot here lately, but he was like, this is the time of year to go for broke. This is worth celebrating. And it takes us 50 days to sit in this reality and to get our arms around this new world that we're living in, this new world that was inaugurated in the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus was not just some supernatural event that happened out here in the eternal spiritual realm. The resurrection happened in our world, in the physical world. It interrupted our timeline. It disrupted human history to bring something new and fresh and unseen into our everyday lives. We believe that the resurrection makes a difference in our everyday, ordinary existence. Was having a conversation with a little group of friends over Easter weekend, and then it spilled over into the following week. And it's one of those really good ongoing conversations where you, like, for days afterward, you're following up with texts or phone calls, like, hey, I've been thinking about what you said. Hey, well, you know what? I heard this thing. Let me add this to the conversation. We were talking about the reality of the resurrection. And one of my friends, who's deeply thoughtful, empathetic person, said, you know what? Sometimes it's hard for me to hear all the triumphant language and celebration of Easter, even though I do believe Jesus rose from the dead. She said, sometimes it feels like it's this unhealthy, yeah, death was defeated, we're the winners, woo! When I look around and I have friends and neighbors that are suffering with the reality of death. And that's all of us, right? We are Easter people. We got to figure out how we live in a world that is still marked by death. Wars, cancer, violence, just freak accidents. The reality of the deterioration of these physical bodies that we live in, right? We live in a world that is marked by death. And sometimes, I agree with my friend, it's hard to know how to live in that triumphant spirit of Easter in the world that we find ourselves in. We like to tease my father-in-law. He's in his 80s now, and he has lived his entire life in this same community in Northwest Arkansas. And so what that means is he has watched a lot of change and he has grieved a lot of death by these people that he grew up with. He's buried his parents, his siblings, his first wife, his son-in-law. And every time he calls us, we jokingly say, well, it's time for the death report. Because he's got to give us the list of everybody that's in their circle of people that's passed away or is in ICU or has entered hospice. He is living with that stark reality that this is a world that is marked by death. And it's easy for us to ignore that or to skirt around it for a lot of our lives. But there comes a point for every one of us, because of our own suffering or because of the suffering of someone that we're close to, that we've got to come face to face with the fact that this world, in many ways, is controlled by death. The biblical imagination helps us wrap our mind around this a little bit using language of captivity and slavery. And even though captivity and slavery is not a reality in the U.S. in 2026, it's still a really effective and arresting concept, because we as Americans are so rooted in this idea of individual liberty, okay? We believe we have got the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and those are God-given rights. And the biblical story says, yeah, those may be God-given rights, but that is not necessarily going to be your lived experience because of the world that we are in right now. And the writer of Hebrews, I feel like, fleshes out this idea just a little bit more and gives us some handholds of how we can develop a vision for what it means to live in resurrection reality in a world that is marked by death. So this is going to be the text we're going to be in for this morning. Hebrews chapter 2. And just a little bit of a context note here about Hebrews. Scholars are not in complete agreement about who wrote the book of Hebrews. So I'm just going to say the Hebrews author or writer. But they are real clear about who the audience was. It's this group of ethnic and cultural Jews who are living under Roman rule, but they have pledged their allegiance to Messiah Jesus. Okay? That's a complex reality to have to navigate. And the writer of Hebrews takes all of this imagery and ritual from the old law, the Torah that the Jews would have lived under, and he says, look, or she, I'm going to leave that out there. He or she says, okay, look, all of this, the temple, the tabernacle, the priests, the atoning sacrifices, all of this is fulfilled and made a reality in Jesus, the Messiah. All right, so he's helping them wrestle through all of that. And in Hebrews chapter 2, 14 and 15, he says this. Since, therefore, the children, okay, that's us, children of Adam and Eve, share flesh and blood, he, Jesus, himself likewise shared the same things, so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. I'm going to read that one more time. Since, therefore, the children share flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared the same things, so that through death Jesus might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in, let's read this together, held in slavery by the fear of death. Held in slavery by the fear of death. Way back in the Garden of Eden, sin enters the picture. And so what also enters the picture? Death. Sin and death come hand in hand into human reality. And that is such a revolutionary reality for humans that it shapes the way that Adam and Eve and then all their descendants all the way down to us, it shapes the way that we show up in the world. Death is the enemy, and so we, on our deepest, most biological level, we are conditioned to do what? We're conditioned to avoid it. We're conditioned to avoid it. Think about the instincts and the reflexes that your body has that you never had to develop that help you avoid death on a daily basis. It is a little bit crazy when you start to think about it. Like peripheral vision. You can see something that's like coming over here. You don't have to think about that. It just happens. Think about how many times in a day you slam on the brakes or you swerve to avoid something that might hit you when you're driving. Or you're chopping vegetables and you like lose your grip on the knife and it comes down and you like, without even thinking about it, hop back, right? We are biologically conditioned to avoid that which brings death. That is a good thing. And even when it comes up here like into our cognitive thought, avoiding death is a healthy way to go. It keeps us doing good things like going to doctor's appointments, taking our medicine, eating fiber, wearing a seatbelt. So it is a good thing that God has allowed us biologically to develop this avoidance of death. But here's the thing. Even this good development can become a place that the devil, the one who has the power of death, can get a hold of us. See, here's the thing about slavery. Slavery is being compelled to act in ways that I do not choose for the benefit of whoever owns me. And so, when the fear of death is the controlling force of our lives, Satan has got a hold of us and he can make us act in ways that are not what we would have chosen for ourselves. He makes us act in ways that are to his benefit, the one who wants to undo the goodness of God's creation. Dr. Richard Beck, he's a clinical psychologist, and he explores the way that spiritual truth and the field of psychology intersect. So fascinating. He has a whole book exploring this idea. It's really helpful for me, and I'm wondering if it might be helpful for you this morning. He says this: we get the sin equals death. Like that's a causal relationship, right? But he says, if you back up and you look at the whole of the biblical narrative, and then we look around at our own world right now, and we look down at our own psyches, we can see it's not just that sin brings death, it's that death brings sin. We begin to act in ways that are selfish, self-centered, self-protective, in ways that walk over or oppress or deny the needs of our neighbors because we are so fixated on avoiding death and preserving our own lives. And it really becomes this cycle. Carter, can we show that picture? The sin and death and sin and death and sin and death cycle. And you can hear echoes of that all the way through the New Testament as these writers are encouraging these people who are trying to follow Jesus. And they say things like, you're in slavery to sin, you're in slavery to death. And I think this is the cycle that they're trying to get these disciples of Jesus to envision. It's not just that we're out seeking sin, it's that there's something down here inside of us that has got hold of us and is causing us to act in ways that we would not have chosen for ourselves. But the resurrection of Jesus has something to say about that. See, Jesus came and he shared in our flesh and blood so that he could enter this cycle at the very heart of it. Jesus entered death to undo its power from the inside out. If death and fear of death are what is controlling us down deep inside, Jesus comes into that death and he begins to loosen the chains. that keep us separated from the life that God offers us. In John 10:10, Jesus says, "The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy, but I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly." Often, I think when we talk about this verse, we imagine that the abundant life is like, is Barnhill still a thing? Or what? Do we still have it? Like, what's the buffet restaurant? Do we have a Golden Corral? There you go, Golden Corral. Okay, that the abundant life is like the Golden Corral. And everybody can go and you can get as many plates at the Golden Corral as you want to. And it never runs out. They just keep like bringing out that, I don't know what, dressing or green beans or that weird ham in the like oily water, you know? Like they just keep doling it out, doling it out, doling it out. And we might be tempted to imagine that that is what God is inviting us into. Like that we've got our little plate and he just keeps doling it out, doling it out. And that's not an entirely wrong vision. But I think that a better way of understanding it is this. The abundant life that Jesus offers us is being free enough to experience all that God already offers us through Jesus. We're not standing here with an empty plate waiting for God to dole it out, dole it out, dole it out. Romans 8:32, he, speaking of God the Father, he who did not withhold his own son, but gave him up for all of us, how will he not with him also give us everything else? God has offered us himself through Jesus. What is keeping us from experiencing that is not God. It's not God's decision. He's not holding out on us. It is our own bondage. But Jesus enters into death to undo the power of death, that which keeps us enslaved to the fear of death, so that we can become more free to experience all of who God is. Now look, in our Western world today, in this advanced society that we live in, we are separated from like the physicality of death on a day-to-day basis, right? I don't think a lot about death, big D, on a daily basis. Like I'm just living my life. I'm not really thinking a whole lot about today could be the day that I'm going to take the dirt nap, okay? Because I'm just separated from that. But I think that this big D, death, shows up in our lives any time that I am in fear of loss, of not having enough, of failure, of purposelessness, of being abandoned, of missing out on something really good or important. All of those are just the little peaks of death that we experience day to day. If the fear of death is the slave master, then all those little deaths that should show up in our everyday existence, all those little fears, those are the chains that keep us bound day in and day out. But Jesus invites us to live in a different way. And I know for myself, two things. I can live in complete avoidance of the way that fear controls me until I try to do one of two things, okay? One is when I take the time to look back on my life. And I think about the things that I most deeply regret. The choices that I made that I still feel a huge amount of shame and guilt over. Ways I treated people, choices I made ways that I used my resources or didn't use my resources, that I hoarded them. And when I sit with that long enough, like I let myself think about those things that I still carry with a lot of shame, I realize that so much of those choices were rooted in fear. I was afraid. I was afraid of losing my place in a group of friends, and so I treated this outsider in really mean ways. I was afraid of not having enough money for myself or my family, and so I said no to an opportunity to be generous. I was afraid of being taken advantage of and looking stupid, and so I refused to forgive and be reconciled to someone that had hurt me. The fear of death in those little ways kept me bound and controlled by fear. And then here's the other way. When I look forward to the way of life that I want to live, what Jesus says is the good life, and I find myself saying, that's just too hard. Well, I know. So what really is underneath that resistance, that reaction of resistance, is fear. Here's where I first began to see that. Let's look at the Beatitudes. Matthew chapter 5. Graham, was that last summer that we spent time in the Sermon on the Mount? Y'all, that did a number on me. Not in a good way. That was a struggle. It was a struggle because the life that Jesus paints is not something that I can do of my own power. Listen to these words from Jesus, Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. That is not an aspirational life. That is not something that I can get there with a life improvement plan. But when I read what Jesus says is possible, a life that is someone who is free enough to mourn, someone who's free enough to hunger and thirst for good things, someone who is free enough from fear to be merciful or to be a peacemaker, or to willingly undergo persecution for the sake of what is right, I know that I want Jesus to set me free to follow him into that kind of life. I want to be free from my own fears of not having enough or being taken advantage of. I want to be free from the fears that keep me motivated and pursuing status or popularity or wealth or impressive degrees instead of being pure in heart enough to let all of those worldly accolades go and to be focused on following Jesus with everything that I've got. I want to be free from all of the what ifs so that I can step into the challenging work of peacemaking. I want to be free from my fears about the future for myself or for my kids or for my own neighborhood or people that look like me, and follow Jesus and do whatever he asks me to do. In the same way that we can be caught in the cycle of death and sin, the power of Jesus can bring us out of that cycle into a new cycle. Carter, can we look at one of those pictures here? When we begin to allow Jesus to undo the chains of fear that are keeping us bound to an old way of life. We are free to experience God on a deeper level. Here's just one little example of that. So you might have noticed that I've mentioned this often in my little examples here, because I have a fear of going without. I don't know where that came from. I don't know if it's a fear of not being independent, or if it's a fear of suffering or discomfort. I'm not sure. But I have got like a reflexive fear of going without, especially going without options. I do not like to feel trapped and like I don't have some options for my own choices for my life. But when I allow Jesus to undo that fear of being trapped or going without just a little bit more, I'm a little more free to experience God as generous, to experience God as the host of an abundant life where there's always more to discover and do and experience in Him. And that doesn't just become an inner reality, it becomes a way to step into freedom for new ways of living. I'm not afraid to extend myself, to be generous, to make a commitment. I'm not controlled by that fear any longer. I'm free to follow Jesus into new life. And that too becomes a cycle. Deliverance and a deeper experience of God and greater freedom for new life. And here's the beautiful thing about that, is that as we keep going and living in that cycle, that freedom keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper into who we are and shapes us and changes us and allows us to have new ways of being in the world. I want to offer you two little practices for stepping into this new way of living. I'm trying really hard to think more about the resurrection as power for everyday living. And man, it's so tough. I think we've done 3 weeks on it now, and I think we could keep going for about 30 more. Because it is so easy for us to just treat the resurrection as some sort of spiritual, theoretical reality that we get to cash in on when we die. But Jesus offers us doorways into this cycle of deliverance and experience of God and freedom for new life that are simple and make a difference for the way that we're living today. And I want to just offer you two little doorways out of the cycle of sin and death and into this new way of living that you might take with you into this new week to think about. And even as the band comes in just a few minutes and leads us in some worship, we're going to give you a chance to sit with these two doorways and think about a next step that you might be able to take. Okay, doorway number 1. God, reveal the fears that are controlling me. See, here's the thing about living in slavery to the fear of death. If Satan can keep us operating down here like in the subconscious part of our mind, okay? So we're, kind of like you swerve the car or you jump out of the way of the knife. If Satan can keep us living in that way, where we never really ask deeper questions about why we're doing the things that we're doing, he can keep us bound indefinitely. But when we are willing to sit with God and to ask God to reveal to us things that he knows about us that we don't even know about ourselves, we are stepping through the doorway toward freedom. So here's the question. God, reveal the fears that are controlling me right now. Where am I stuck? Where am I in patterns of sin? Where am I in patterns of anxiety? Where am I in patterns of worry or really unhealthy patterns in my relationships or the way I'm spending my time or the way I'm spending my money or the way I'm prioritizing my life? Where am I stuck? And God, what is the fear that's driving that? Reveal it to me, God, and begin to undo that by the power of Jesus. And then doorway number 2. God, guide me into a next step into new life. See, here's the thing. I'm not always going to be ready to live the life all the way of the Beatitudes. But every time that I take one small step into that life, every time I take one small step into being merciful when that's not what I want to do, into making peace when that's not really what I want to do, into hungering and thirsting for righteousness only, even when my fleshly instincts might be pushing me in a different direction. I'm letting God come into my life and help me experience him in a fresh way. I'm allowing God to undo those chains of fear that bind me and make me a little more free to experience the life that he is offering me today. God, what are the fears that are controlling me? God, how can I take a next step into new life? I want to end this morning with some words from author John Updike. He's talking about the resurrection, and I just want to offer this as a blessing for us today. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to sing and sit with these two doorways that Jesus invites us to look through. And then we're going to come back and gather around the communion table together. Here's John Updike's words. Speaking about the resurrection, he says, "Let us not mock God with metaphor or analogy, sidestepping transcendence, making of the event a parable, a sign painted in the faded credulity of earlier ages. Let us walk through the door."
Thank you, Ashleigh.